All right, welcome back. And if you're someone that's familiar with my content or you're a subscriber of the channel, you may have already noticed that this is a much different setup than what I'm usually doing. I'm usually sitting right back here with my whiteboard set up right here, going through some stuff. But I thought I'd do something a little bit different like I do every now and then, where I would talk about some things that I would love to see changed in the upcoming patch. And I thought it'd be a lot easier to kind of show you guys what I mean and what I'm talking about in the actual game client as opposed to what I'm usually doing where I'm just talking off the top of my head. It'll just be much easier to visualize this. And if you guys have already clicked on the video, you know that that's what I'm going to be talking about. And one other thing I'm probably included in the title is that I'm going to be coming at this from a viewer's perspective. I am still someone that plays a decent amount of Dota still to this day, but I also watch a ton of Dota. And so a lot of the things I want to talk about are not necessarily hero or item changes like we've been hearing a lot of as of late. You know, maybe a specific hero like Spirit Breaker totally broken, or a specific item totally broken. Rather, I want to be talking about certain things on the map that I would love to see changed, and maybe a few other things after that, just to kind of change the entire macro game or shake it up at least a little bit so we don't have the same formulaic process when watching the pro scene on a very stale patch. So I was talking about some of the things from the recent patches that have been in the game for a while, maybe a little bit too long. Also, some things that have been around for a few big patches now that I would love to see shaken up. And you guys can let me know what you think in the comments down below. So I got a little checklist here. I'm going to be going through this again, more focusing on the general macro mechanics of the game and just the general terrain. Which I'm not going to be trying to predict where trees are going to be. You know, I'm not going to say that this path is going to be gone, but I'm just going to be talking about general, again, larger portions of the map. The first one I'm talking about is Outposts. Outposts, for example, we have the Dire one up here, the Radiant one down here. These have been kind of controversial. I remember when they first got added, they were much different than what they are now. Currently, they're just a GPM stack for whatever team has them, and it's a nice thing that you're able to teleport to, especially in the late game when you don't have as many towers that you can teleport to, or maybe you don't have boots to travel. Which are pretty nice, but it feels like ever since they kind of changed it from being something that goes off at a specific time and rather it being a passive flow of XPM, these things have felt a little bit redundant. They have felt pretty undervalued. I don't know if that's just me speaking. Obviously, pro teams might have some strategies revolved around securing these. They can be very, very important at certain times, especially for establishing the map control that I've been talking about. But I would really love to see some sort of change to these buildings, as I don't think they bring as much value as they should. For an indestructible item that is capturable by a team, I don't think these things provide enough, especially since buying boots of travel is just a lot easier at this current point, and if you want to get to where you need to go. So I would love to see some sort of rework or maybe a change. Maybe we bring back shrines, put them back in the jungle. I like the idea of having some place to teleport to in the jungle. Makes defending your side a lot easier, but at the same time, it makes taking if you lose this bottom jungle as Radiant, it makes taking that back much more difficult, which is also something that I want to see changed about the jungles. Essentially here, I'll go through, but if you guys know the terrain quite well, you'll know that every single jungle is rested up on a high ground and all the lanes around it are low ground. So the triangles are elevated, and then we have the main jungles here, which are elevated, which, similar to the outposts, make it easy to defend because you have the high ground advantage. However, once you lose that, it makes it very difficult to get back in because the enemy team now has the high ground advantage, which kind of makes it so, again, there's a lot more focus on that map control and really closing a team out of certain areas. There's essentially four corners of the map, the two triangles, and then the two larger jungles. Obviously, one of those being more valuable than the rest, that being the Radiant Triangle, which is right next to Roshan, which leads me into the next thing that I want to talk about, and that is moving the Roshan pit, maybe not in a very, we don't need it to be moved to the other side of the map again or anything like that, but I think it needs to be in a place that is a little bit more favorable for Dire. I think right now it's very fair to say that Radiant has a clear advantage, and teams know this. Teams tend to really prefer playing on Radiant due to the fact that they have access to their triangle, which is one of the easiest places to defend. And one of the hardest places to lose on the map, as it is so hard to invade early on. And so it just gives Radiant an innate advantage of being right next to Roshan, whereas the Dire jungle here is much easier to invade, given that there's so many more entrances. And so something that I would really like to see is if this was moved maybe just a little bit closer to the Dire side, maybe even implemented into the Dire side jungle, and maybe obviously reworking some of the terrain around here would be kind of nice, just to kind of even things up a little bit. And again, maybe messing with some of the high grounds around some of the jungles and stuff like that can kind of play into that. Maybe making the Radiant Triangle a little less optimal to play around, and maybe the Dire top jungle a little harder to invade, thus to kind of balance things out. Because again, we've had kind of the Radiant side advantage for quite a long time now, and it is entirely possible that we maybe have a new Roshan. Of course, there's been plenty of teasers about the new Primal Beast that's going to be added to the game. A lot of people are speculating in what way the beast can be added, whether that's going to be as a hero or whatever it is. Some people even speculating that maybe we'll be taking an approach closer to League of Legends, where they have multiple of these PvE bosses similar to Roshan. Maybe there will be another one over near the Dire Triangle, and that'll be the way to balance things out. There's really no way to tell right now, but it is kind of nice to speculate. So yeah, anyways, some more things I wanted to talk about, specifically about Roshan as well, is I would really love to see maybe just a slight buff to Roshan himself as an actual enemy in the game. You know, he's pretty easy to take down, unless you really have a lineup that has no real way to deal damage. But typically in the late game, just a couple cores is all it takes to take one down. If you don't have like an Ursa or like a Wraith King with a Deso on your team, then they can even just do it on their own. I'd really love to see Roshan be a little bit harder to take down, a little bit more exploitable for the enemy team to come in and invade, because Roshan fights ultimately are always pretty fantastic. And in general, I would love to see that, as well as kind of a nerfing, or maybe just if he is harder to kill, then it wouldn't be as bad. But I find that the drops that he has are a little bit insane, and we've kind of seen that with the Aghanim shards. Ever since Aghanim shard was added to Roshan's second drop, previously it also had the cheese as well, which was way too strong, and we saw that a lot. But I think him dropping a shard at some points even earlier than the 20-minute mark is also pretty busted, especially with some heroes that we've been seeing throughout the past year that make very, very good use of that shard. Heroes like Ursa, like Queen of Pain, like Axe when he had his Manta build. I would really like to see maybe a little bit less reliance on Roshan. I don't know if that's going to happen, because Roshan is obviously a huge part of the game, especially at the pro level. You will hardly ever see teams going high ground without an Aegis, but I don't necessarily know if it needs all that extra stuff. Because right now, again, as a viewer, as someone that watches a lot of Dota, it really feels like as soon as a team takes the first Roshan, you know, they establish their map control, they corner the other team off to maybe just their triangle, and then with the second Roshan, the game just kind of snowballs out of control, and a lot of the time the game kind of just ends right there. So I would really like to see more opportunity for games to turn around in the Roshan pit. Okay, so that's enough about some of that. One more thing that I want to talk about that's kind of revolving around the terrain. It's not around Roshan or any of the jungles or anything like that, but I'd really love to see a change to towers, in the sense that Glyph can provide spell immunity and a purge. I think we've all had games where we were getting split pushed by maybe like a core Jakiro, or even just like a support Jakiro, or maybe a Treant Protector or an OD that uses their liquid fire or their meteor hammer on the tower, and they're split pushing and you don't really want to attend to that, so you glyph, but they hit it with this meteor hammer and it's stunned for 2 seconds, or you hit it with this liquid fire, and now when you glyph and it split shots, it only shoots out like 2 to 3 projectiles, which is nowhere near enough to kill a creep wave. So I'd really love to see a small buff to towers in that sense, giving them some spell immunity, giving them some purge to deal with some of the late game things that are very, very good at knocking down towers, like Viper's poison attack, and again, taking it back to Jakiro. That's just a small quality of life thing that I think that towers are really in need of right now, because the split shot mechanic can feel very, very useless against certain lineups. Another thing I would really love to see is the removal of some of the some of the camps around the mid lane. It really feels as of late like these small camps are being super, super exploited, and the current meta at least has also been to just block the enemy small camp at the start of the game. Supports will come up and they'll block them with sentry wards. Both teams do it because it's kind of the mandatory thing that you have to do now with a lot of the mid laners that are popular right now, like the Spirits, or maybe Leshrac or Kunkka or Queen of Pain. Very good at clearing those small camps and getting themselves small advantages and just ramping themselves up even quicker. Which has been kind of the meta right now for mid, is just get online as fast as you can with as much gold as you can, and then you just hit this timing where you're just unstoppable, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I really wish it wasn't so formulaic. And again, another thing around the mid lane, I feel like it should be the terrain should be a little bit different around here. It feels very easy to get bodied off your tier 1 tower, and this might be something that I don't think a lot of people would necessarily would agree with, because it depends on whether or not you think tier 1 towers right now are too hard to siege or if they're too easy to siege. Because typically a team that has a large advantage will just come at you from one of these angles back here, or there's a lot more space to play around. You can really pin people back here or shove them back here. And same thing for the dire. Teams will come in closer to this side. They'll pick up a rune or something over here, and then, or even hell, from over here they just pin you away from your tower, and there's nothing you can really do about it. When back in the day around the mid lane, we had a lot of terrain around the mid lane, like high grounds and stuff, where we had this one going across right here for Radiant, and then we had the ancient camps right up here. And we also had an ancient camp back over here, back when we had those ancient prowlers. We used to have a high ground that kind of came out here, made it a little bit more difficult for teams to get behind this tier 1 tower. Same thing goes for the dire. We had a whole bunch of high grounds that kind of stretch along here, high grounds that were just right here, and again, it made it a lot harder to siege that tier 1. And maybe to compensate for that, we can move the tier 1 back a little bit, because right now the tier 1 towers are quite close to the high ground here. There's really not a lot of space, but it's because you're able to get behind them so easily that you don't need this space. Whereas if you blocked all this off, maybe move this a little bit back, then it wouldn't be such a big deal for teams, because these towers, they split the map down the middle. You cannot, as an enemy team, like if an enemy team is sieging, no team can really cross this safely, or at least feel all that safe about crossing it without getting intercepted, just because there's a tower right there. So that's something that I would love to see changed. Again, not one that I am totally expecting to get changed, but we'll see where they go from there. Okay, so that kind of does it with the general macro of the map, just a lot of the terrain stuff that I would like to see changed. Now to talk about some of the smaller things that I'd like to see changed, some lane-specific things. First one's first for mid lane. Obviously, I would love to see water runes removed. This is coming from a mid laner who has been very much enjoying this meta of just picking whatever you want mid, buying a bottle, and you're guaranteed to make it to the 5-minute mark with a decent lane. For most matchups, that is. But I think it's gotten a little repetitive. Again, it makes the roaming support role a lot more difficult unless you're actually able to secure those mid rolls. And ganking the enemy mid laner is a lot more difficult just because they're always topped up on health and mana. So it's a lot more difficult. You need to bring a lot more resources, which in turn, again, makes sieging the mid 1 tower maybe a little bit more difficult. But then once time comes up and you're able to get in here, it's not as big of a deal. And another thing, this is just a small one. I would love to see the runes maybe moved a little further away. I don't know if that would totally kill Bottle, sorry. Because of course Bottle right now is very, very good, but I feel like the runes are maybe a little too close to the mid lane. Like, it doesn't feel as big of a deal to just leave lane and get the rune, whereas before with the dire side, or sorry, the bottom side of the rune used to be all the way down here, somewhere close to here, back when the Roche pit was actually down here, and then it was recently moved up to here. And I would just in general like to see them maybe a little bit further away, so it's not as easy to control both of them at the same time, because they are so close together. If one team is winning, all it takes is just one ward on one side and you basically have control of both runes, because you can tell where it spawns and you can go from there. So that's something I'd like to see changed. Now looking at some of the side lanes, no real complaints about the side lanes, other than the fact that I feel like they've kind of lost a lot of their creativity, and that is 100% intentional. We saw that they implemented the things where you're not able to cut creep waves until past the 5-minute mark unless you grab them specifically from here. You cannot grab them from the enemy lane. Like, say if I'm playing on Radiant, I cannot grab them from over here anymore. I have to wait until they're over here until the 5-minute mark. But one thing I would really love to see changed is the current meta in the side lanes, and that is just the constant pulling, essentially, where we have 2 camps where both supports have to focus on pretty much nothing else other than making sure that these camps are not blocked, or if you're trying to prevent pulls, making sure that this is blocked, for example, if you're Radiant, so that they can't pull, and making sure that this is unblocked so that you can. It just feels like a really cheap game of cat and mouse where you're constantly worried about the other team dewarding and blocking your camps. And I'd really love to see some sort of change. Where that would come from, I don't know. I know there used to be a little bit more terrain around here that kind of blocked it and made pulling a little bit more difficult. Maybe that would be the solution. But I think a shakeup in the side lanes would be quite necessary at this point. Again, this is one of those things that has been the same for for quite a while now. And I would love to see a little bit more versatility, because again, if one team has total control of this lane and is always pulling, then it makes it difficult as a 4 position to really justify leaving your lane and doing anything anywhere else, because then your laner, your other laner, your lane partner is just left out to dry. And it's, again, it's the same thing on both sides here. And okay, so that really does it for the map changes. Nothing really else to talk about there. Some more things I would really love to see changed is fucking bug fixes. We are in desperate need of a spring cleaning. Valve, we need a spring cleaning patch. The bugs are really starting to ramp up. It feels like every other day there's a new thread about some bug that's coming up that feels totally, you know, random or just really strange and unique. And we have people on Reddit that are finding these bugs for you, and so it'd be nice to go through. I know that the new patch is likely to create some more bugs. They always do on the new patches, but it'd be nice to really have a spring cleaning update at some point soon, if not now. The Techies rework is something I'm very curious to see which direction they end up going. They've reworked them before, which ultimately, it didn't really change the way the hero was played. He was maybe a little bit more dynamic as they gave him a ranged explosion, that being his blast off ability, which had some utility to it, that being his silence. Although I don't know where they're going to go from here. I am very curious. I am not someone that is necessarily against techies or techies players. You guys might hate me for this, but when I was first getting into Dota, I was really into techies. Especially that was around when they had reworked him. But I'm curious to see where they go with him and if they make him a more engaged hero that is actually a part of the whole macro part of the game, as opposed to him just playing, you know, Minesweeper on the side. Marcy added to Captain's Mode. Not a hero that I'm particularly fond of in a hero design type of way. I still think her ult is a little bit clunky, where she can be played as a support, but her ult feels uniquely core. Like, it doesn't feel like it makes any sense as a support hero, but I would still love to see this hero get added to Captain's Mode in the next patch, just because the hero has so much room at such a high skill ceiling, I should say, and room for amazing plays on a support role like position 4. And if we do see more roaming support, Marcy is a hero that I would love to see more of. And so I'm hoping she gets added to that, and maybe she gets, you know, a little bit reworked. She still doesn't have an Aghanims or an Aghanim Shard, and so I'm curious as to which direction they end up going for that. I hope it's more of a supporting thing, or maybe some sort of Ags and Shard that kind of, you know, let her play more of a supporting role, or maybe incorporates her ultimate into more of a supporting role. Maybe she can cast it on an ally. I know those are kind of overused in Dota, but anyways, I would love to hear you guys' thoughts about that. And the last few things, of course, just the notable nerfs and buffs to certain heroes and certain items. There's some heroes that I wouldn't be surprised if they don't go nerfed or anything like that. For example, Razor. Razor is a hero that is being picked quite a lot in the pro scene as of late. However, I don't see the hero being necessarily broken. It's more just seeming like a hero that is a perfect fit for the current item meta, being BKB and Refresher. Like, that is just a pure, like, Razor build. Like, you can build that in Razor in any patch and it won't necessarily feel terrible. It might not be the best in every single patch, but I think the real reason why Razor is so strong right now is just because, one, he fits the tempo of the meta, and two, the item build just fits very, very well on him. And so if they just shake those things up, then I don't think the hero will need any sort of tweaks. But that being said, BKB, I think, is the obvious one that kind of needs a change. I think ever since they made the minimum duration to 6 seconds, it just scales way too well, and it made buying it in the early game much less punishing, which is why we're seeing it so often in the early portions of the game, which is why we're seeing so many physical-based cores like Kunkka, like Templar Assassin, even Shadow Fiend at a certain point, because they just, at a certain point in the game, around the same time players are getting their BKBs, they're just able to do an overwhelming amount of physical damage to kind of power through that. So we'll see where they go from here. And last little bit of stuff I want to talk about is Aghanim Shards, actually. And this is one that maybe not everyone will agree with, but I personally, when they first added Aghanim Shards, it kind of struck me the same chord as when they added talent trees. They wanted heroes to have more diverse paths in item builds. They want you to have, you know, multiple options for different item builds that you can have for different heroes. Where, for example, if you're playing like an Ember Spear, you can go for like a physical based if you choose the certain talents, or if you want to go magical, you'll pick those magic talents, and maybe you'll buy your shard, which goes very well with the magic build, which is what people are doing right now. However, I don't think that the Aghanim Shards are tweaked all that well currently, where it feels like rather than the Aghanim shards providing another avenue for potential options for item builds, it really just feels like the Aghanim shards are either broken or they're mediocre or they're not. And heroes are kind of made or broken around whether or not their Aghanim shards are very popular. Again, Queen of Pain, very, very good shard. Ursa, when Ursa was popular, a very, very strong shard. And it coalesced very, very well with the fact that he could take Roshan very quickly early on, and he gets it after the second Rosh. Again, Axe. Axe's shard was proven to be very, very powerful, and the entire build was around that, whereas it doesn't feel like there's as much diversity. It just feels like when it's exploitable, that's where the entire attention goes to. And so I'd like to see them tweaked a little bit. And this is where I kind of theory crafted the idea of, similarly to talent trees, where we have two options. You know, maybe some options are like spell based, some of them physical based, some of them offensive based, some of them defensive based. Maybe we have the introductions of like different color shards, where we have like the red shard, which is like the physical damage build or whatever, and it goes very well with your physical talents. Or you have like the blue shard, which is like your typical one, which goes well with magic damage or something like that. Again, just something that opens up new venues for heroes to expand their possibilities for items. However, again, that would take a lot of tweaking to make sure, and that is a lot more things to keep track of when heroes start getting broken. So it's going to be important to make sure that that doesn't get too out of control. And yeah, so that's been it. That's been a 20-minute video now. Wow. Quite a long one. I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, if you're new here, feel free to like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. We have a Discord server. Check the description down below. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys later tonight. I'm going to be doing a news video in just a little bit. We've got some roster shuffling still afoot. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys tomorrow or later tonight with another video. Bye.